Right, knight versus rook, where there are pawns on both wings. This is quite a small section in Dvoretsky, and I think the reason for it being such a small section is there's not really much to say on it. We've already seen how hard it is for the side with the knight, even when the pawns are on the same wing. When you've got pawns on both wings, the rook can switch all the way across the board quickly. The knight can't, so it's just usually easily winning for the side with the rook. This is a game from 1958. It's white to play, and this position is indeed winning for white. However, it's not easily winning because what do? How does the rook get in? It's all very well that the rook's more mobile, but how's it getting in? Like on the c file, where the rook is at the moment, the black king and pawn together, the pawn and the king are controlling c6, but the black king's controlling all the entry points. And we might think to play rook across to f1, but the black king can just come to e7, where it's controlling all the entry points together with this pawn here. So what's the plan? And this is a position where, again, I think really strong players know they need to stop and think about what's their plan, how are they going to get in. This is one of the occasions where I think they do think many moves ahead. That fallacy of like when you tell a non-chess player you play chess, they're like, oh, you must think 10 moves ahead. And it's like, it doesn't really work like that. But sometimes we do have to think quite a few moves ahead. And I think the strong players will be really thinking quite a few moves ahead here and thinking about where they, how they're going to break through. What are they? How are they going to get their rook in? Basically, what's the plan? So pause the video and work out what your plan is. You could come up with the same plan as the player with the white pieces did back in this 1958, which is just a good and quite clever plan. It's not the only winning plan. Dvoretsky doesn't go into a different winning plan, which the engine's recommending. I'm looking at the engine's best move now. It's fairly simple what the engine wants to do. Yeah, how are we going to win this as white? So the player with the white pieces at the time played rook e1, and they're threatening rook e5, invading that way. Okay, and if black does nothing about that, then they're in trouble. So the player with the black pieces now played knight d6. And the point of this is that if the rook comes into e5, knight f5, blocking the rook's attack on the g and h pawns, you might think to play h3 to get in g4. You don't mind swapping the g pawns, and knight takes g3 doesn't look very good for black, but black can just play g4. And this is now no longer winning for white. This is just a drawn position, so that would be a bad way to go about things. But in the original position, when white played rook e1 and black played knight d6, although they were threatening rook e5, they had no intention of playing it now. And what would you play now? Because if you've played this in the game and you played rook e1 and then your opponent's gone knight d6, then you've gone, oh, I can't really play rook e5 because he'll go knight f5 and after h3 g4. I need something else. I suppose you could go around in circles a little bit and come up with a different plan. But, I like to think the player with the white pieces had already, when they played rook e1, seen knight d6 and they'd prepped this. Bosh, take that. Opening up lines for the rook. If the knight takes that, then we're in. Plus 4.5. Okay. That plus 4.5 is an abbreviation, by the way, of going into all the various variations, but you can see that those pawns are getting gobbled up. These are going to become passed pawns on the king's side. It's going to be a very easy win. So the player with the black piece at the time took with the pawn, but now the A file's open and the rook's in. In the game, black played h4, which doesn't seem a very clever move. Like, if you're the side with the knight, then, this is a +1 position, and after h4, the engine's changed it to a +2 position. Now, I'm not a big fan of just going with, the engine says this, therefore, it's this is bad and this is good. I think if we don't understand why, then those engine evaluations are sort of meaningless. Some of you watching this, if you know me, then you know I sort of regularly scold people for placing too much emphasis on engine evaluations. So why? Well, if you're the side with the knight, then you don't really want to open the position up, do you? So after h4, which is what was played in the game, you know, the white's got the g file as well, and this h-pawn's even further away. If we think about the power of the rook and how it can switch from one side to the other, black's now got a weakness on the h file they need to defend, as well as worrying about all the stuff going on over here. I mean, these pawns are not exactly very clever defending each other or anything, are they? So h4 is a strange choice of move, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But what if instead black just played something more solid, like b4? Well, the white rook's in, rook a8, and maybe black's saying, no, it's not in. I'm going to go knight c8. King across to e3, black king to c7. White's going to open up the position anyway. h4. G takes h4, g takes h4, and we might see here knight d6. Okay. The point of knight d6 is that black's trying to get their knight to f5, forking these two pawns. And I mean, king f4 is a winning move here, but white's got an even safer way to go about things, which we'll see in the game actually as well. Rook f8, king d7. The main point of rook f8, by the way, is that if the knight does come in and do its fork, I forget which famous player it was. It might have been Casablanca or some great chess player said that one of the best ways to take advantage of being up the exchange is just be ready to give it back at an opportune time. And here's where we do that. That's just a completely won king and pawn ending. That it's not really a trick, but that motif is that the right word? Does end up being used in the game. White just gives the exchange back and goes into a completely winning king and pawn ending, and there's lots of different examples of that. So that's the point of rook f8, and if instead black plays king d7, king f4, king e7, rook across to h8, then the knight can come into f5, king into e5, knight takes h4, and rook h7 check, talk English eventually, and when the black king goes back to d8, we'll gobble up the e pawn. The h pawn's going, the d pawn's going, and yeah, you can see that that's really very bad for black. I think that's pretty easy to win from there. But a slightly cleverer move, which retains the option of knight f7, but also knight f5, sorry, but also gives a different way of getting at the d pawn, is knight to e7. Okay. And in this circumstance, white's better off coming in straight away with king f4. This can get a little bit knife-edged. Okay. White's still winning this. Dvoretsky goes through this particular position. Black's got 4 pawns, white's got 1. But, you know, the rook can get right across the board in one move. The knight takes ages. It's a winning position for white. So that's, I mean, I think he goes through that particular variation just to sort of point out that in a way it doesn't really matter how many pawns you've got once it's rook versus knight. You just need this one very dangerous pawn and it's going to be a win. So that's b4, a more solid line, but yeah, white does eventually get there. In the game h4 was played. I'm not convinced that was a particularly clever move, sort of opening up more lines and creating more weaknesses for the white rook to get at. Rook a8, then b4. White now played a weird move, a very strange move, and I think this is a move that just wasn't thought out at all, which is rook a4. That pawn can't even be taken. Okay. Black actually played king c7. This pawn can't be taken because your rook gets trapped. That would just be a win for black. Instead of rook a4, which Dvoretsky calls dawdling, white should just get on with it. Rook f8, which is what eventually happened anyway. In fact, after this rook a4 mistake, I can't think of a single reason that white played this except with the intention of taking on b4 and then realising afterwards they couldn't, which that's not good, is it? At sort of master level, that's not a particularly I'm annoyed with myself when I do that. I mean, I've got the courage to go back on what I've just done, so you look a bit of a fool, but I am annoyed with myself because the next move is where I don't take that pawn. It's just an admission that I've been a bit of a fool. I was going to say something else there. Yeah, so black now plays king c7, but this b4 pawn is defended so well by the fact that you just get your own rook trapped if you take it. It's a massively poisoned pawn. That black doesn't play king c7. Black's best move is to go the other way with the king. Okay, because if rook takes b4, b5, white's lost. Okay, that king's just going to come back and win that rook, or at least attack it, so the white king's out of commission defending it, but can't defend it. I mean, it's just lost. So instead, after king e7, white would have to go back to, okay, sorry, didn't mean to attack your b pawn, rook a8, but then the black king's already on, you know, the right side of the board. It's still just winning for white, I'm afraid to say, for anyone cheering on the knight. Rook d8, knight f5, and then rook d7. So this is a weakness. Sure, the black king come over to the king side. Black's looking pretty solid defensive setup on the king side. But white's like, fine, you know, you're solid on the king side. I'm going to get a past b pawn. Then what are you going to do? And, you know, black's then got to waste time and energy defending the b pawn whilst they're trying to sort this out. Then we can get back on the king side. It's just too hard for the knight to basically counter this mobile-ness, the extra mobility of the rook. So yeah, I mean, king e7's better, but not really. So king c7 played in the game, king e2, king to c6, rook a8, finally giving up on that b pawn, which could never be taken. Knight into f5, changed mind on the king, get back and defend the d pawn, king d7, rook b8, king c7, rook f8. That's a nice little maneuver. Just drag the king out of position before you bring the rook to f8. King d6, rook f7, b pawn moves, h3, and black's in zugzwang. Once again, one of the main weapons of the attacking side. Just like bishop versus knight, zugzwang's one of the main weapons. Rook versus knight, zugzwang's one of the main weapons. The main point, I mean, the knight has to move, unfortunately. The king's only got one legal move. You could pause the video and work out what's wrong with that if you want to. We've already seen one example, variation of a plan that white can employ. But king c6 would indeed lose to, there you go, there's the exchange back. Looks a bit dangerous at first, doesn't it? You'd have to calculate it. e6 is the only square that the black king can reach to defend the f5 pawn, but king g5 outflanks, and it's a winning king and pawn ending. So black can't play king c6, and in the game they played knight h6, but then the rook got the right side of the knight, and simultaneously is attacking the h pawn as well as defending the d pawn. And once the knight comes back to defend, I mean, black can't even unsettle the rook with a c5 push because the knight's hanging. So it really is just a great square for the rook. King e2, king e7, king f3, king f7, king into g4, king g6, white to play. What would you do? And yeah, well done if you said time to give the exchange back and take ourselves into a winning king and pawn ending. So other than the sort of the messing around later on, attacking a b4 pawn that could never be taken, the player with the white pieces played that quite well, and it's gone into this Dvoretsky endgame manual, in my view, basically because of this idea. Like, how are we breaking through? Don't know. Well, what about this b5 idea, opening up another line? And just the knight sort of overworked. The knight couldn't go back and take on b5 because rook e5, and the rook and the rook's in on the king side, and if the pawn takes, the rook's in on the queen side, which is great. You know, this whole idea, by the way, wasn't actually the only plan that won. I'm going to go back to the beginning now and show you a different plan that the engine's come up with that's not even in the Dvoretsky endgame manual and looks a bit simpler. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't just look at what's just happened, and the whole idea is we're trying to glean ideas out of this, isn't it? There's no definitive rules. Oh, if you've got rook versus knight with pawns on both sides of the board, in this position you must do this, and in this position you must do that. We're just trying to gain ideas, and the main idea there is that the rook's just more mobile. So open up lines if it gets the rook in. We saw one line where white just ended up with just an H pawn against 4 black pawns, but that passed H pawn was just gonna march home. That was it. So yeah. Anyway, I'm waffling on, but hopefully we've picked up some ideas. Back to the original position. White can win it with just rook f1, obviously threatening to invade on the f file, king e7, and then just h4. If g4, then this route is now open. So we go rook back to c1, king d7, king e3, king to d8. So the king's still defending there, and the pawn. So you still can't get in on the c file. And then the king's in. Okay, knight takes d4, king g5, rook, knight takes b3, and shift the rook. That's maximum distance from the knight. We're just going to mop up the 2 pawns, and black's just going to find it impossible to defend against those two pawns over there. So the engine's got that as +4. I've got a feeling actually that back in, I misremembered one of those variations. I've got a feeling the engine wanted to play a rook move instead of king f4. Yeah, a bit bizarre that. It wants to play rook c2, or maybe rook c5 first. Oh no, it's changed its mind. King f4 is the top move now. Back after this h4, just opening things up. I mean, the side with the black pieces might just think, well, in a minute, if I play g4, the white king's in, I'm going to be losing both of these pawns. Maybe I might stand more chance if I at least exchange one of them. Maybe I can get my knight into f5 with this forking idea again, but you kind of can guess where that's going. G-file's open, knight f5, rook to g5, knight takes h4, rook takes h5, knight back to f5, check, king d6, and we're gobbling up those pawns over there, and black's not going to be able to hold on to this, and again, just completely won for white. Right, next, this is a game from 1985. It's the only other position I'm going through in what's was meant to be a short video. Well, it should be short relatively. It's only up at 18 minutes at the moment. This one shouldn't take too long. White to play, pause the video and decide what would you do here? What should your next move be? This is completely winning for white, but how are you going to convert it? How are you going to display the technique when they say, oh, and the rest is technique? So well done if you decided that the best move here is rook h7 check. Just force the king back a rank before collecting the h2 pawn. If black plays king e8, we come and collect the h2 pawn. Black's got to act decisively here, otherwise it's just going to be lost. So knight c3 is quite clever because the d2 squares forked. The black knight can fork the king on g5, and anything that you're about to put on d2 with a now or taking a pawn in a minute. But white's got quite a clever response to this, which is just to ignore it. So f6, d2. I quite like this line. All right, have our rook. We're getting a queen. You might be wondering, okay, so back at this rook h7 check, that line there that we just saw, that wouldn't work, would it, if the black king was on f8? Like there, if after king g6, and we took the rook, yeah, if the black king was on f8, that wouldn't work. So why don't we play king f8 here? And rook takes h2, and now after knight c3, well, we can't, we have to move the king this time, surely. King g6 is still a winning move, but we don't actually. We can still just push the f pawn, because after d2, king g6. and we're threatening checkmate, and once the black king's got out of it, we can just come and take the d2 pawn without having our king and rook forked. So it's a very, very simple win. This original position, by the way, is checkmate in 24. It's over. White's winning. But in the game, white plays rook takes h2, which, I mean, just as a principle, why would you not just push the black king back? You know, even if it's to give your king these extra squares before coming back to collect the h-pawn. It's just bizarre. But that's what happened. Rook takes h2. Black comes in with this knight c3. White's still winning this, but only has one winning move here. And it wasn't what was played in the game. Rook h7 check. In the space of 2 moves, White's gone from checkmate in 24 to completely drawn. This is now just a drawn position. The way to win it was king f4. And after knight e2 check, there's 2 ways to continue from here. Just king back to e3 and you will eventually get there. But arguably simpler than that is king e5. So when the d2 pawn is pushed, rook h7 check, the black king has to stop rook d7, otherwise that's sort of clearly over. So king e8 is the only move that does that. Then the rook can come back to h1, and when the knight comes to c3 to threaten d1, queening, king e6. And yeah, the checkmate threats are, or in conjunction with pushing of this f-pawn, are too much. I mean, king f8, f6 renews the checkmate threat. King d8, f6, we can just lose the rook and play f7, it's queening. So yeah, it was still winning at this point if white plays king f4. In the game, white played rook h7 check, and it's now just a draw. But black needs to find, or you could pause the video and have a go at it if you want, what move does black need to find here for it to be a draw? And the answer is king to e8. Okay, so how is this a draw? Let's look at white's options. First of all, king f6. Okay. In this case, black can play knight e4 check, not d2. d2, king e6, that's more or less transposed to where we were a minute ago. That's a win for white. But if the king's gone to f6, black can play knight e4 check. King to g7, d2, rook to h1, and then how about this? Knight g3, forking the rook and the pawn. We're going to get a drawn version of knight versus rook. So after this king e8 move, what if white played king g6? Okay. Well, this time we do push the d pawn. Rook h8 check, king d7, rook back to h1, queen, rook goes. You think, right, my f pawn's coming through. Knight e3, f7, king e7. Your f pawn's not coming through. Knight f5 check, and it's a draw. So yeah, this white threw away the win basically in just 2 moves. Went from checkmate in 24. Although in the game black didn't play king e8. In the game black played king to f8, and we saw king g6. It's now just completes back to checkmate in 15. So they blundered their way in like 2 or 3 moves from a checkmate in 24 to a checkmate in 15 somehow. D2, f6, renewing that checkmate threat. In fact, the side with the black piece is just resigned here, in fact, because they couldn't be bothered to play the rest of it. It's a fairly trivial win. But if we saw d2, f6, king's got to get out of there. King e8, and then how about that for a cool move, rook a7. So when black queens, we can go check, check, and it is carnage. I mean, we're either losing the queen straight away. I mean, it's checkmates in 6 moves, but that if we're losing the queen straight away, or if black insists, then, I mean, we can even come here, can't we? Force the king to the d file, and then check on d8 and lose the queen and win the queen. But I'm sure you could do better and get a checkmate there. But a queen versus a knight, especially a knight that's on d1 when the king's up the top end of the board, is obviously just over. So yeah, not too much going on in this video, mostly because if you've got pawns on both sides of the board, then the rook's just stronger than the knight because it can get all the way across from one end of the board to the other. We saw that mostly in this position. But we did see that one other position as well. I think I've forgotten what I was meant to be saying there actually, but yeah, I hope everyone found that useful.